halfway through Hell Year, and we're America's unluckiest podcast, the Pod People. I'm Matisse Van Rossum, obviously.
Yo, yo, yo! It's Little Panicotta, also known as Ben Sheets.
Hi, and I'm Cleveland Mosier, and I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more fever.
From the sea.
Sea fever.
Well, it's that time again. It's our mid-year catch-up, and Cleveland curated our choices this year. Normally, we were going to do our usual and do 3 films from 2020 that we haven't gotten around to, and we thought that the pickings would be pretty slim, considering that COVID has halted the release of a lot of the movies that we predicted, and just movies in general. But how wrong we were, because Ben sat us down and made us watch 6 hours of movie trailers of like Shudder exclusives, and it turns out that actually a bunch of movies came out in 2020.
Video on demand never dies, as much as you might want it to sometimes.
So we spent a long time watching these trailers, and Cleveland, our designated caterer, made a list and decided which ones he wanted to choose.
But I encountered a problem. I wanted to do 4 movies. And I couldn't do 4 movies. We got only 3. I didn't want to not pick any of them. And I still had to write one off. Actually, there were 5 I was actually interested in. But I think we'll be picking that one down the road anyway, so it'll be fine. But fortunately, my pick was coming up next. So we figure instead of doing 3 in 1 and then another one that I also picked, let's just bunch them together and do a 2-parter.
That's right. So this week we'll be talking about 2 of the films that Cleveland has chosen, and then we'll cover the other 2 next week. All right, so the first film that we're going to be talking about is an Irish film called Sea Fever, written and directed by Nisa Hardiman and starring Connie Nielsen, Hermione Corfield, Doug Ray Scott, Olwen Furrer, and
well pronounced. Good job.
I'm real on my game tonight. And Ardalen Esmaili. It is about the crew of a West of Ireland trawler marooned at sea, struggling for their lives against a growing parasite in their water supply.
And for all you landlubbers, a trawler is a fish boat.
It's a fish boat.
Or ship, whatever.
Fish boat's the technical term, right? Well, before we start talking about the movie proper, I want to talk about, like, the intro of this particular version of the movie that we got. Do y'all remember at the very beginning?
Well, what it is it's part of a theatrical digital run. A lot of movies nowadays, in lieu of all theaters being closed, are doing theatrical online runs. And with that, they feel the need to add, pre-roll for their movies and sometimes post-roll. Thankfully, this movie didn't have any post-roll.
Yeah, I had never seen anything like this. It started with I think this is from some streaming service or production company, Dust, right? Mm-hmm. I had never heard of them. And that started by, just this lady coming on being like, Good evening. Take a trip to the bottom of the sea and discover the paranoia of boats and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it was like the science of so-and-so with aquatic whatnot. And I was just like, am I at the Explorium? What the fuck is going on?
With the brand new film, Sea Fever. It's like, what is this?
Yeah. I was a little primed for it because earlier this week I watched this movie Emma. It was on Mubi as
with a B?
a cinema alternative thing.
Did they do something?
They did a
similar?
pre-roll before it, and then they did a little Q&A after the movie, like a pre-recorded
you mean after the movie?
digital. Yeah, after the movie. After the movie. Can't say I was expecting this one. It was definitely weird, but I wasn't as flabbergasted by it, I guess.
It was definitely off-putting because I wasn't expecting it. But let's dive into this movie. I thought the trailer was very cool.
It had me hype.
I was very excited to check this movie out, actually.
I should know better.
Spoilers, I guess. It presented itself as like The Thing at sea, which sounds
Dope premise, frankly.
Sounds like a great premise. The film is shot very well. It is quite
Generally.
Yeah.
There are exceptions.
Most of the movie is shot quite well, I think. You know, it's got a nice aesthetic. It's lit well. You know, there's a lot of this like the kind of stormy gray Irish sea. I overall liked the aesthetic. But it's about our main character, Shaban, who is some kind of aquatic researcher. They try to do it as like a joke more than once where she tries to explain what she does, but people aren't interested. And similarly, I also wasn't interested when she tried to explain what she did.
Yeah, I was intrigued. I like science fiction, like I like hard science fiction, and so I'm usually like I'm super on board for it. And I
It's
got a
presented
vibe
in an interesting way.
Yeah, well, like, and I got a vibe off the trailer that we'd see that, like, she's packing microscope, she's ready to roll.
She's definitely a science-centered main character.
For sure.
And credit to her character. This is probably the last like positive I'll say about the characterization, but credit to like her characterization as being like not a people person. I liked that at the start. Like I thought that was cool. Like she's incredibly standoffish, and she's the epitome of an introvert, and I dug that. I thought it's nice to see like an introverted like protagonist. You don't see that very often, male or female.
I think the actress that plays Siobhan gives a pretty good performance in this movie too. The writing might be kind of bland, but like the performance itself,
I think
she didn't have a ton to work with. But
Yeah, I think that goes for all, like the majority of the cast. I don't hold any resentment towards like their performances per se. I don't think that any of them were poor actors by any means. Like they were they did passably at like what material they had.
Well, she is setting sail aboard this Irish fishing vessel to do some research while they fish. She has to like photograph their catches and look for anomalies. Something
right because she studies
generic.
Yeah, she studies like pattern development. Which is incredibly vague, but
most of the science in this movie is incredibly vague.
Unfortunately, that's where I
So, you know, she's, as you said, she's an introvert. She's not a people person. And she's put on this boat with these, like, very working class, like, sailors and engineers and fishermen and stuff like that. And to top it all off, she's a redhead. So, you know, old sailing traditions, it's bad luck to have a redhead aboard your ship. So, you know, these people are superstitious. So they immediately don't like her because she's standoffish. She's not personable. And she's a motherfucking ginger. They wouldn't have let me on that boat either. And so with Siobhan, I stand in solidarity.
Well, I mean, for good measure, though, Tease. I mean, you have sunk literally every boat you've been on.
Look, yes, I have sunk every ship I've been on, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be allowed on more boats.
Excellent.
Allow gingers on ships. So yeah, you know, that's the setup. We've got our extremely generic cast of characters on the ship.
Let me before you say the name, I want to present this as a game for our listeners.
Okay.
Right. There's a character, one of the sailors. She's one of the owners of the boat.
Yes.
Yeah. I was trying to like name her station without like making like the wife up. But yeah, like, she's captain.
Oh yeah, she's the captain's wife and she owns the boat.
Yeah. So for our viewers, I want to present you with what she is. She is another superstitious character who is Norwegian. Her primary function is to exposit Norse mythology. What do you think her name is?
Freya.
You guessed it right. It's Freya. So that's about the depth of her character.
There's her husband, the captain, who his character is that he sucks. He's the fucking worst. He makes the majority of the bad decisions in this movie. He's kind of the impetus for everything constantly going wrong. And I hated him, and he did not die soon enough, in my opinion. And then there are a handful of other people. There's old woman. There's handsome engineer.
Old woman who cares about nephew.
Old woman who likes handsome engineer because he's her nephew or something. There's some kind of relation.
Yeah. It might not be nephew, but it's something familial.
There's some kind of familial tie there. And then there's other slightly less handsome engineer. And is that it? Is that everybody? I don't.
Basically,
Whatever. Those are the only ones who have any kind of import. And yeah, they're out sailing, and they realize that they're on a path to go through this exclusion zone. And
At first, only the captain just runs them because he's a shithead. He runs them through it, so he can save some time and budget.
Well, right, and
Without
then,
telling anyone.
And then they notice and say, "Oh no, we can't do that." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'll change course." And then he doesn't. And
Don't they get a call from like the Coast Guard or whatever?
Yeah,
That's
Yeah,
something
saying like,
like
"Hey,
that.
don't go in the exclusion zone." And he's like, "Cool, I won't." And then
they say
does.
something about like there's like a pod of whales, like something. It's like a birthing ground for
Which,
whales. or some
frankly, I
shit.
mean, like, he just earned his death there anyway. Dude's willing to fucking trawl over some whales. Fuck him.
Right. And then, of course, they wake up the next day and I can't believe you've brought us into this exclusion zone.
Oh, no.
And then something, we have to catch these fish or I'm going to lose the boat because we're deeply in debt. They hit something large that breaks only one thing on the entire boat and it's their radio, so they can't call for help.
Yep.
And something is holding them in place, and they are mired. And they send Shaban down in a dive suit.
Like,
because...
hold on. I got to backtrack real quick.
Okay.
Was the radio, was it fastened down?
No.
Come the fuck on. These are veteran fishermen. Like, the radio would have been fastened down. Like they're on like they're like out
you
of
have
out at
to
sea.
have the radio destroyed for plot.
Like, fuck you. Like, I swear to God. Like, these are veteran fishermen. They wouldn't fucking leave
Right.
the radio, like, not fastened down so it could be busted.
Right. Well, because that's exactly what happens.
Yep.
They hit something that they assume to be like a large shoal of fish or something, something large and moving fast under the water.
Yeah.
And literally, like I said, the only thing on the boat that it breaks is the radio.
Yeah. And like, what's better for making you like characters than general incompetence?
Exactly.
Right? Wonderful stuff. Like, I'm sorry that, like, they lost their kid or whatever. Like, they have this tragic backstory that's alluded to, like the figurehead or whatever it's called.
Yeah,
of
at the front of the boat is like their daughter. Or something.
It's like an effigy of their kid and stuff.
It's once again completely vague and
Doesn't really have any payoff.
no, and also doesn't have any importance to the plot.
Yeah, I think it is just for us to, like, feel some sympathy for them, but they really bring about their own ends largely. So
Before we go further into the plot, I want to give a general observation that I saw with this movie. Like, it's very clear that this movie, in a lot of respects, is a direct ripoff of The Thing.
Yes.
With the paranoia on the claustrophobic, boat, not knowing who's infected and who's not. But when I was thinking about it more earlier today, what movie I saw a direct comparison with this movie is Prometheus. It's a lot of, underdeveloped characters making bad decisions. With that said, there's some cool concepts that works at times, some cool visuals even at work at sometimes. But the overall package suffers because a lot of things within it are half-baked and not fully thought through.
I think Prometheus is a generally more entertaining film than this
Yes.
one.
Well, it's a bigger budget.
Correct. And that helps a lot because this film's lack of budget really does show itself in bad ways later in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're always proponents of like do more with less. You don't need a budget to make a successful movie. Look at It Follows, look at stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that lack of budget can't hurt a movie. And this is one of those ones where it does hurt it because, like you said, in comparison to Prometheus, I think you're right. The writing is not very good, but Prometheus is saved by like some really great set pieces and impressive effects.
And while the characters aren't very deep in Prometheus, at least some of them have, like, a degree of intrigue. Don't get me wrong, the engineers in Prometheus drive me up the fucking wall. Like, there's a lot of frustrating things about it. But, like,
I also think
David's
some of-
compelling.
I also think some of the
Like-
characters in
like-
Prometheus are likable.
Yeah,
And
like
I
there
didn't
is
really like
there
anybody in this
there are
movie.
intriguing and compelling characters in Prometheus. Like, I think they're all pretty flat. Like, I do agree with that point. But, like, this film, what's her name? Shaban.
Yeah.
At first, I was intrigued by her, but by the end, started to find, like, even her
Oh, I
kind of
hated her.
unsufferable.
I hated her by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
My last note on Prometheus is just to bring up that we have referenced Prometheus so many times on this podcast now that I think we're gonna have to watch it at some point.
I'm okay with
because we have multiple times brought up Prometheus on this podcast.
I have a lot to say about Prometheus. I'm okay
But I
with
think similarly to Prometheus, this movie, its best elements are, likewise, its set pieces.
Yeah.
Whether it's the claustrophobic setting of the ship. I think a lot of the heavy lifting of this movie is done by the cramped environments that they're
sure.
in.
I just wish there were more stakes to it. Like, they have this great environment, but I don't think they really take good advantage of what they can do with that in the way that, like, The Thing does.
Yeah, well, and you even have some good effects-heavy set pieces in this. The standout sequence of the movie was the first guy who got infected. Eventually, he keeps rubbing his eyes.
the love interest character.
A good
The handsome engineer.
a good 10, 15 minutes of the movie.
The lead up with him, like kind of getting the fever, like wanting to go for a swim, like while they're out in the high seas. It's like, no, we don't do that. Like, what are you doing? That was fun. And I think, like, Ben, you even said during that, like, oh, this is neat. Like, this is, more of this. It's almost like it's kind of it's Lovecraftian.
That was me.
That was
Yeah.
you. Okay, yeah, it would be. No, it was very, like, it's a nice, like, it's subtle enough. It's not him, like, getting all wide-eyed going, I got the fever, I'm on the ship. It's nice. It's like, oh, let's go for a swim. They're like, whoa, hold on, slow down. And that's really all we get of
Well,
that.
it's even implied that he doesn't swim and no one else on the ship really swims. So seeing him want to go for a swim is unnerving, and I think that's really effective. But later on, as he succumbs more and more to the sickness, we eventually see his eyes just explode in a horrific fashion.
And it's dope.
Yeah, like a little tadpole parasites burst out of his eyes, and it's awesome. And that should have been like where the film started ramping up. That should have been the beginning of, that should have been the escalation.
And I was ready for it.
Instead, that is the highlight of the movie. That is like what ends up being the climax.
Yeah.
I think
and that and like seeing the creature early on.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that next because we should provide a little bit of context for the infection.
Yeah.
And that is a scene that I actually, while I was still on board with this movie, pun intended, when they hit the thing and they're stuck and they can't move, they send Shaban down in
Don't call it the Thing.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Sorry.
The whole
The creature. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. They send
accurate but confusing.
they send Shaban down in a diving suit because they said, oh, well, you had to dive for your research anyway, so go down there and figure out what we're stuck on.
Diving she goes.
So diving she goes, and she quickly sees that the boat has run afoul of some Tron sperm. Because that's what the tentacles look like. They look big, glowing blue sperm cells with little mouths on them. But yeah, she sees that like the boat is stopped by like these tendrils that go way down into the depths, into some enormous cosmic butthole jellyfish nightmare. And she's very quickly like, no, fuck no, I want out, and gets out. And we see that these tentacles are like dissolving holes in the ship, and that's really cool with them like peeling away like the dissolving wood and seeing like the little sucker mouth on the outside.
It's rad. But here's the thing.
Cool.
She's the one. She's a scientist who goes down to the water, and like clearly she has some sort of background in biology, like an aquatic biology.
Right.
Otherwise she wouldn't be on this trip. Even if like that's not her main background, like depending on like how much of her focus is on like patterning and behavioral patterns and whatnot. Regardless, she's smart, and she's the one.
Well, the film tells us she's smart.
Right. We're geared by all points to believe that she's smart. And like, here's the thing: if your character is standoffish and like non-charismatic, by howdy, they'd better have that going for them. You want to make sure that they come across like an intelligent character. And she goes down. She sees this definitive alien right? This is not something that has been seen before, and she's not at any depth. She's just below the immediate surface.
Right.
There's little to account for it being like something from like the deep trenches. It could be, you know, but like
It's something
it's an
unprecedented.
alien.
It's
Like,
something unprecedented. Yes.
Yeah, like it's not a cephalopod, which is the first thing that she says it could be.
Well, no, she comes back up and describes what she saw and is like, I have never seen anything like that. And the captain is like, oh, you're just nervous because we're stuck out here. It's probably just a giant squid. You just thought you saw something different. Yeah. So just like immediately writing off. And it's like,
yeah, well, because he hops on giant squid because she says something along the lines of like it's like it's like a cephalopod, or it's something like this or whatever. And he goes, oh fuck, giant squid. I'm gonna nail me one, like Ahab. I did kind of like that, how he hopped on. Is like, oh fuck yeah, I'm gonna get me a sea beast.
Yeah, drop the net down. Let's scoop it.
Because I mean, who wouldn't? Like I get that. Like fisherman side. Fuck yeah, let's haul in the ultimate catch. She looks kind of like terrified of what she saw, but her analysis of it like is not anything really deeply scientific. Like we don't really get what I would have liked to have been like a nice like biological monologue there. We could have gotten like a really cool combination of shark's eyes or like a doll's eyes and also like a scientist, like biologist perspective. It could have been cool.
Right, and she doesn't stand up for her analysis of what she's seen, you know? She allows herself to just be written off as the traditional hysterical woman, you know? We saw what she saw. Like you said, she's a fucking scientist. Whether she's trying to classify it as some kind of strange subspecies of something that exists, like a cephalopod or whatever. Okay, fine. She has a scientific mind. She would want to try to classify it. Mm-hmm. But for the captain to be like, nah, your eyes were playing tricks on you. It's just a giant squid. I'm going to go scoop it up. For her to not be like, no, fucking listen, it has glowing tentacles with mouths on them. It tried to bite me. Like, it's enormous. Like, she didn't stand by that at all and just, like, allows herself to be written off.
Yeah, no marine creature of any size has anything like that. And exhibit B of her being a terribly written scientist is when she goes, she's the person, her character, you've got a whole crew of people. Her character is the one who barehanded touches the corrosive substance.
Yes.
Yep.
In high school chemistry,
yeah.
High school fucking chemistry, they tell you to waft the fumes and shit like that, right?
But if you don't, I mean,
you
just
see,
general rule
it's
of
like,
thumb,
oh,
if
hey,
you don't know
look.
what something is, don't touch it with your bare hands.
Yeah, but no, the one piece of data she does have is it is melting through the hull.
Right.
Maybe don't touch that. Come the fuck on. Like, where is like any amount of like caution, like from our scientist character? It's frustrating.
That's another direct Prometheus parallel to the scientist character touching the alien thing with their bare hands.
Yeah, well, I think part of the issue with her being disregarded right away is it makes her character come off as very passive,
right?
Which isn't a problem in itself. The problem comes, I would argue, in the second half when she does try to stand her ground, and it does kind of ring hollow.
Exactly.
Because, we saw her get pushed aside easily before without her pushing back. And I'm sure they were trying to do character development with that, kind of have the arc.
She's come around and gained her confidence.
Or she's just finally had enough.
But the thing is, at its core, they're in a doomed environment. They can't move the ship.
Right.
When they're stuck on it and he's trying to get the net out even, what is she going to say? We got to leave? She knows you can't leave,
Right.
It's kind of a weird situation because it's a very doomed situation, and there's no real thing you could say outside of, oh, yeah, don't try to pull this in, you idiot.
There was more stupidity to it. I forgot. There's another piece of dialogue where she says, or the guy says, like, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to, kill it or whatever and haul it in. And she says, no, it could be, an endangered species or something. And she goes to bat for it when it was like, she saw what it was doing.
We gotta protect the alien monster.
What? Hold on. I don't know about that. Like
in that respect, it felt very inspired by The Abyss, where they are trying to help these deep sea creatures. and not always kill them necessarily.
Yeah.
But you definitely end up killing them.
Yeah, which is fun, like when that's handled like more competently and it's not like in such a futile setting. Like in the Abyss, like they're in like their undersea station with all the money in the world, like running it. But here it's like an abandoned trawler. Like they have no chance, hardly of getting out of there. Like the first thing, like when you look into the depths and see alien butthole monster, like
glowing alien,
like bioluminescent like alien butthole monster, like should just be like get the fuck out, especially like pre like establishing like a need for quarantine.
The first half, to an extent, worked for me because I felt like it definitely carried that vibe.
Well, it felt like it was building up to something.
A doomed, situation. They can't escape because the boat won't move. They're stuck in uncharted waters. They're going off of their path, so the Coast Guard wouldn't know where they are.
Exactly.
Their radio's broken. It feels like a very hopeless situation. They see another ship in the horizon, and they go to visit it, and you see the aftermath of the whole crew on the ship has died brutally.
Yeah.
And you see like one is missing their eyes. Looks like their eyes were gouged out. And
a lot of knife wounds.
Not a lot of knife wounds.
Stuff like that.
And I thought that stuff was excellent. It built dread super well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, because through all of that, it feels like it's building up to something. And that's why I was all the way, like, even though the characters weren't particularly interesting and the writing wasn't great, I was definitely still invested through all of that stuff up through when the dude's eyes burst.
Because, like, thematically, this is everything I would want. And I think, like, like, that goes for y'all as well. Like,
yeah.
we love nautical. I love nautical shit. I love The Thing. I love everything about this genre that's being presented to me. And for that, like, yes, I can be guarded about that, but also, like, you're already just by premise giving me everything I want. Like I would think it would be pretty easy to keep me like happy and satisfied, like watching this film.
It's a simple enough premise that it should be hard to fuck up. And
right.
The fact that they ultimately did is what really, really frustrates me, because all of the stuff that we've been describing so far, despite our character frustrations, has been cool. Like the Tron sperm tentacles,
awesome.
When we see them underwater,
cool
they
design,
look cool.
Yeah.
The practical effects, like when we see the little sucker mouth eating through the ship, that looks cool. Finding the people dead in horrible ways on the other boat, cool. The dude who's infected because there's larvae in the goo and he gets summoned to an open wound like you do. Like the thing about him, like you mentioned, him wanting to go for a swim after dinner. It's like when I saw that, I was like, oh shit. So he's like the creature's like calling to him. That's why it felt like so Lovecraftian. It's like he wants to swim. He wants to be near it. He's enraptured by this weird otherworldly monster. But no, they keep him from going in the water, and then nothing like that is ever addressed again, because shortly thereafter, his eyeballs burst and the larvae get into the ship's water supply. So now it's like, the whole boat's contaminated, and the rest of the movie is just like very lazy, half-hearted attempts to figure out who or who isn't already infected and how to get the creatures out of their water supply. And using very soft science for somebody who's supposed to be like a keen scientific mind.
And not only for someone who is supposed to be keen and scientific, but who has the equipment to do better testing.
Yeah.
With them.
We see her looking at like the microscopic larva like in the goo, like studying it. And Ben, was it you who called at the very beginning that there's going to be some kind of like testing scene to determine who was infected?
Like The Thing.
Right, exactly like The Thing. You called that very early on, and you were like half right. Like they have a scene.
I mean, I was pretty much right.
I mean,
yeah.
well, you were right in that they have a scene where they gather everybody together and that they like test them. But the test just involves looking into somebody's eye with a flashlight and seeing if anything is moving.
Like what the fuck? Like,
which is such a lazy, unscientific test.
Really a payoff to it. At the end you find out the captain has it, but it's not revealed in a particularly
The
dramatic
flashlight test
way.
it just straight up doesn't work.
Well, no, that's right. It doesn't. They see something moving in the captain's eye, and that's how they know that he's infected. But the old woman was also infected because she was handling her nephew or whatever's corpse. And they shine the light in her eyes and don't see anything.
Yeah, because she shines it in her eyes for like a grand total of 4 seconds.
And then it's like, and they're like, okay, well, that's confirmed. If there's nothing moving in your eyes, then you're not infected. And like 5 minutes later, it's revealed that she's infected. Our scientist character, Shaban, should have something more clever than that. Like if fucking Kurt Russell in The Thing can come up with a creative impromptu like test to determine like who is infected and who is not, like this scientist should be able to do the same thing or better, you know?
In a respect, I kind of like that they bring up multiple methods of her trying to test and it failing. Like, for example, with the black light, the UV light.
Oh, yeah.
It's stupid that they create a UV light. It's not something you can do easily with the resources on this cramped fishing boat.
Yeah, they turn somebody's cell phone flashlight into a UV light using Scotch tape and blue Sharpies. But, like, the greatest epitome of that fucking frustrated me the most is her plan to get it out of the water supply by essentially electrocuting the entire boat to like run a current using seawater as a conductor to run a current throughout the entire boat that will electrocute anything in the pipes.
Can't see my face right now, but I'm just like staring like listlessly and blinking repeatedly. What?
The funniest part of that sequence was you see the captain as well as the wife touching things.
Yeah.
Right as they're like putting the charge in. And it's like they're going out of their way to make sure we know that they're wearing rubber boots, but they're still touching things with their hands, right. You're still gonna get the arcs with that shit.
There's also a bit where like the Shaban like waves the electrical thing like in someone's face to hand it to them.
Yeah, right. That was
clearly like the actors were just like handing it off, and like they weren't worried about it because it wasn't actually like a live wire.
Right.
It really took me out. And the guy didn't respond to it or anything. Like it could have been like a fun character. It was like, whoa, Watcher, you're pointing that. That usual cliche. But nope, no, just waved it in his face. That's it. All right, cool.
Of course it doesn't work because it's a completely stupid harebrained idea. And
great way to fry the engine too. They were talking about how they could maybe insulate it, and it's like, no, you're gonna fry everything else you have.
All they succeeded
any
in
means of
doing
cooking
is,
your food too,
yeah.
fried. Like your ship is your one means of survival here, and you're gonna.
All they succeeded in doing is lighting the figurehead on fire. And like realistically too, it has been shown that they have beer and soda and other bottled and canned drinks on the ship available for the crew, and they're only about 30 hours out from port. So why are they even worried about getting it out of the water supply? As long as they can confirm that nobody's infected, they have more than enough liquid and food to survive until they can get back to port and like deal with it appropriately.
You got to do the old cabin fever method of only drinking beer.
Exactly.
For the entirety of the ship's passage. And I mean, like, I think that's an interesting comparison with Cabin Fever, actually, because they're both kind of quarantine outbreak movies. The one thing I'll say to this movie's benefit is I think this movie had amazing release timing. Like, it came out on the perfect time with all of the quarantine and COVID stuff.
There's definitely a good quarantine message in this movie,
it feels very timely and prescient. But with Cabin Fever, you get so many more payoffs.
Way more.
The thing is with this movie, like you said, the action really happens with the eye explosion. And shortly after that, you get like the shower scene where he's all cut up from
we see
things in the shower.
We see like
the
the larva
microbes.
like crawling into his back, but like he doesn't have an interesting death. He literally just gets sick. He gets the fever and just dies in his bed. The old lady who gets infected dies when she attacks Shaban and Shaban kicks her in the head. The captain has his wife cut his throat off camera. When you're dealing with something, a monster that lays its eggs like or puts its larva like inside of other organisms, you expect there to be like some kind of like crazy horrific like birthing, like the monster coming out of them, and we get the one scene midway through the movie of dude's eyes exploding.
Yeah, in that whole sequence, like we see the guys, we get the only real cool like death on screen, right? And also we see the monster for the first and only time.
Right.
Like what the fuck? Like the film just like blows its load like in the first half. We never get anything like either of those sequences again. We never once see the monster again after that. Even for the climax.
Well, we see the big one at the very end, but
The butthole?
Yeah.
We see the butthole
when
at the very
she's swimming towards it.
Well, I thought we see her like swim down, but we don't see it.
No, we see it.
We see it.
we see the
yeah, it's
butthole?
very clearly
we'll
it.
cut that part out. But like we only see it those 2 times, you know, like but
Well, I definitely agree that it kind of overplays its hand early on, which leads to a very uneventful second half and a halt in the momentum of the movie.
I wonder if they originally had bigger plans for the second half and ran out of money in the first half.
That's a very valid point.
Because, like, despite the low budget, like, the effects in the first half and stuff that they do look good.
Yeah, they look really good.
They make the best of their budget, but I think after the eye exploding scene, a really good way to describe the rest of the movie is cheap.
Yep.
Well, and I think the eye explosion scene and the shower scene, since they happen almost concurrently, it really sets the stakes and the dread, which does a lot of the heavy lifting in some of the better elements of the second half. But the problem is there's no moment to justify the tension continuing.
Yeah.
It's obvious that eyes can explode and it can cut into people's backs and do crazy stuff, but we don't really get another moment quite like the eye scene. And because it happened about halfway through and nothing happened afterwards, it really kills the momentum. And, I think the other thing is with the second half, they're trying to play off the paranoia between the crew members. Siobhan really wants to push quarantine to make sure they don't spread this onto the land, and everyone else is wanting to get the fuck off of this boat as fast as possible.
The hospital
and
I want to reference our episode on Alien for like a great example of how to do that sequence in like the 1980s. We have like Sigourney Weaver's character in Alien just say like, nope, you're not coming on this ship. It's not happening. And Bishop has to like break that rule, for his own nefarious purposes. But like that's as deep as the dialogue goes. That's as deep as it has to go because it assumes the audience is smart. But here we have to have quarantine fully explained to us, like ad nauseum. There's multiple scenes of dialogue of her just explaining what quarantine is and how it works. And I get that, like, we're watching this post-COVID, and we've been hearing, like, so much information
quarantine
about
is on everybody's
on the mind already.
Yeah.
But also, like, that's why I wanted to start by citing, like, the scene from Alien and, like, how it just, it assumes, like, its viewer, like, understands some things, and if not, they can use context clues to figure out the rest. But here, she just has to explain how, like, if you go to a hospital with this thing, you could get other people infected, and those people you care about, and don't you care about not getting other people infected? And we have to hear it all, like, brought out.
Well, and more so than that, there is tension in that stuff. The problem is the characters are underdeveloped to the point where the tension between characters it feels a little hollow.
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't feel fully developed. While you can see their motivations and see where they're coming from, they don't really feel like fleshed out characters. So you can't really side with them or even think they're acting particularly rationally.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think another really good example, one that I even made a note of, is after Handsome Engineer dies from his exploding eyeballs, there's this whole sequence of the rest of the crew like coming to terms with his death and like their situation, and it's supposed to be really melancholy. There's like this piano music, you know, there's people sitting in their rooms crying because their friend is dead or whatever, and it's like really, it's a very dramatic scene, but I don't like or care about any of these shallow characters enough for that to feel earned. It felt like, you know, something from like fucking Grey's Anatomy, you know? It's like, oh, somebody died, I'm so sad. Sad piano music and crying. And it's like, but I don't fucking care about any of these people. So why am I like, how am I supposed to like sympathize with them, you know?
And at a certain point too, you get the vibe that the film doesn't really care either, because Freya. Like,
good segue.
Yeah, like what the fuck? So our aforementioned stereotypical character Freya just disappears.
Yeah, after she kills after her husband asks her to kill him, and she does, she literally just disappears from the movie.
Yeah, we were all watching it, and we were getting to the big climax sequence, and I think TC, you were just like, "Where's Freya?"
Yeah, because they decide to set the Shaban and the last remaining other Handsome Engineer decide to set the boat on fire.
Yeah, and apparently, like, we were discussing, like, where's Freya? What's going on? Like, is she on the boat still? Why isn't she there? Apparently, we missed a piece of dialogue. I went back and looked it up, and it would seem that Freya gets on a boat to go to the mainland or whatever.
But we don't see
it. We don't see it. Like, that must have been like an offhand piece of dialogue or something.
Because all three of us missed it. Like,
Yep.
at this point, we were all getting kind of frustrated and, like, we were talking. So it's, like, it's reasonable to assume that we could have missed that line of dialogue. But what a lazy way to deal with one of your characters.
Well, and for me, it's like, why should we care anyways?
Right.
You know, her fate.
Yeah, I don't care what happened to her.
It didn't matter too much to me that they just wrote her off. It's lazy, but I didn't care because I wasn't invested in any of these characters.
No. I mean, that's an important distinction. I wasn't invested in Freya either. I didn't care that we didn't see her again.
But it's kind of insulting that it felt like the creators didn't care either.
It's
what a fuck you to your audience.
It's lazy writing. Like, it's literally just writing your character out of the movie with one line of dialogue.
Literally writing off.
But, you know, at that point, I was so beyond caring, and I mean, at this point, we're pretty much at the end. They're getting into their little inflatable dinghy, and Handsome Engineer falls into the water and gets grabbed by the big beast, and Shaban dives in to save him.
And we see while she's down there that, like, it's latched onto him with these things that can, I don't know, corrode hulls of vessels.
The tentacles have mouths. Like, we've seen that. Yeah.
It's attached to him.
He's, like, wrapped in tentacles, and she goes down there and, like, pulls the tentacles off of him, and in the process cuts herself on, like, one of the tentacles. And so she...
from the viewer perspective, okay, cool. They've both been infected.
They're both infected. But no, when they get back into the boat, she's like, you have to make for the mainland. I'm infected. And it's like, is he not also infected?
Yeah, in what world is he not? Like, how is he not infected? He got grabbed by, like, the acidic acid tentacle.
Yeah.
He's infected.
But nope, it just ends with her diving into the water and a shot of her swimming down towards the big glowing butthole for reasons. I don't know.
Like, I guess she's drawn to it, but...
Or, you know, she figures she's dead anyway and she wants to satisfy her scientific curiosity and, like, see what the creature is. I don't know.
I love to have, like, also been satisfied to see it too.
I didn't
whatever.
fucking care at that point.
She really didn't give a shit about quarantine anymore after that. Well, one thing before we wrap this up that I wanted to mention is I wanted to compare this very quickly to another nautical horror movie we saw earlier this year, Underwater.
A much better movie.
Yeah.
And similarly, you know, Underwater has very thin characters. The difference in why Underwater works where this one doesn't is because Underwater has a narrative drive that's pushing the movie forward relentlessly.
There's constantly stakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
from the very beginning.
And this movie...
And the characters care about them. Like, because this film has stakes. It has serious stakes. But, like, the characters, like, they don't bounce off of them well.
The characters care about it in this one. It's just there's no continual escalation of those stakes.
Right.
You know, you get that peak with the eye explosion, and then you just get nothing.
Yeah, and then it just kind of sadly fizzles
and
out.
where there should be tension and paranoia, there's nothing because there's no pushing of the stakes. So what you're left with are putting the hollow characters to the forefront and really shining a light on the weakness of the writing.
I don't need super nuanced characters when there's enough action and like a cool monster to like take the attention away. Characters can be fodder. Horror movies are all about that, you know? They're characters that are there just to die. But like when there's not any actual like action in the movie or nothing particularly exciting, then like being forced to focus on underwritten characters is frustrating and kind of insulting. And at the end when they're on the fucking boat or on the little dinghy, the green screen, the background is green screen, and it's terrible.
Oh
it
my
looks so
God.
bad.
Like, rough. Like,
That's why I'm saying, like, I wonder if they ran out of their budget before that point, because, like, man, that shit looks cheap.
Yeah, it's like 2000s green screen bad.
Ooh,
like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's nighttime, but you can see like the green screen, like green reflected on them.
The edges aren't cut perfectly around their head all the time. You can see the green.
The lighting
Yeah,
on
it's
the
thrilling.
the lighting on the characters doesn't match the lighting in the environment.
Yeah.
Like all these kind of like little telltale things. Like that's a big old green screen.
Yeah, and rough. And it makes me wonder, I think you were very right that about halfway into the film, something happened and they lost a portion of their budget. Either someone backed out or I don't know what.
Or maybe it was just poorly managed and they realized at that point, oh shit, we're out of money. We gotta make some serious quick rewrites to be able to do this for cheaper.
And yeah, whatever the end was going to be for the film was not what was envisioned in any capacity. And even by the time they had started with production, because
honestly, I hope that was the case.
That's my guess.
I hope that was the case because it's the alternative is worse.
Oh,
that they just got lazy halfway through and it just petered out. Like that's worse to me than them running
Yeah,
out.
well,
Because
I doubt they shot this all sequentially.
Probably not, but you never know. Because there is a pretty dramatic shift in quality around the middle. Probably wasn't shot entirely sequentially, but it could be. Some people do shoot sequentially.
Here's the
weirdly.
thing. There are essentially, I think, two directions this film could have gone in to be gratifying. Either more budget and more crazy effects. You know, I don't have to care about the characters if the deaths look cool. I'm entertained. That's fine.
Right.
More fodder for the meat machine. Whatever. That's dandy. Or less budget, create characters I give a shit about. So if their death isn't as extreme or powerful, I'm less concerned by that because at least the idea of like this guy of one character's eyeballs bursting and then the rest of the crew just tearing each other apart out of like fear and paranoia and like Lovecraftian means is fine. But write it well, like have compelling characters.
Do that. Then actually do that.
Yeah.
Right, instead of half-assing it with like soft science, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And get scientific with it. Like do a little homework.
Or even have a motif, you know, like the idea of him wanting to go for a swim is so compelling that if you had that repeating for other characters
Right.
in, you know, different settings, it's a cool idea. But it's a muddled mess as is, and it's underdeveloped and underbaked.
Yeah, I would have loved like just the whole movie like just been like scientific dialogue and like just trying to unpack what the what the creature was, you know, because like that's the nice thing about a good creature feature, about a great monster movie. I was saying,
You got
like,
Star Trek for that.
in the alien, like in our alien episode, you know, like I love that biological horror where it's like what creature do, how creature work. and,
Well,
and
that's-
unpacking that. And like when you have like a scientist on board, like you're just primed for that kind of dialogue. And yes, it is very, very Trekkian, and I wanted that. Like small compartment, like only a few core people, weird thing going on. Like give it to me. I wanted that.
The
so
creature
bad.
never really feels like much of a threat either. The creature as a whole, I think, is
A butthole.
as a butthole is more docile than I would want from like a movie monster. Because
I like that idea. Like it's so nonchalant about it because it is so effective at what it does. Like it.
But it's not effective at what it does. That's my point exactly. When they see it for the first time, when it grabs the boat, they say, oh, it probably thought the boat was a whale or whatever. And she goes down there and she stabs one of the tentacles attached to the ship, and another one kind of like hisses at her, like bares its teeth. But the creature doesn't attack her. She just gets back up on the boat, and then after they come back from the other boat, they're like, oh yeah, we found some really horrible shit over there, and one of the people on their boat was like, oh, well, enough about that, good news, it let us go. It just like let go of the boat.
Yeah, well, the idea of the creature being kind of a parasite for whales is cool. You know, like having brain worms on
Yeah.
a whale level infecting a whole boat.
Yeah.
That's cool conceptually.
Exactly. Then that's all I meant is like that. Like the premise of it is cool. The practice was poorly
Right, well,
handled because like that's Azathoth. Like this like mindless eater. That's the Annihilation. In Annihilation, like that's cool. Like the idea of like it just being like a big butthole sea Azathoth cancer. Like I'm here for it.
Right, but it's not even doing any of that. Like
No, it's not.
It lazily latches onto their ship, leaves some goo around that gets people infected, generally through their own incompetence, and then it shows back up again to kind of half-heartedly attack the guy who falls in the water, but lets him go very easily, despite the fact that it is like a vast Cthulhu-sized beast. The fact that she's able to just pull its tentacles off and swim with him back to the surface, that's not a threatening, scary monster.
I wish it would have made the sanity affecting elements
Yes.
of it way more clear.
The movie's
Agreed.
called Sea Fever. I want some fucking madness.
Yeah.
I want the virus to spread madness. And
that you can do low budget. You don't need
Totally.
an actual creature for
Totally.
people to start acting insane.
And, like,
you get elements of that in the first guy.
Yeah.
That's the coolest element of it,
he starts to kind of go crazy. Yeah,
Like the
it's-
best thing we can say for like the Lovecraftian menace is dude wanted to go for a swim.
Right.
Like that was the peak of it, and that's not much of a peak.
And the thing is, too, like the idea that we're positing that it was luring him, like it had infected him and it was calling him, that's all stuff that we're projecting on this. The movie does not suggest that in any way at all. So, like, even that cool concept is something that we are projecting onto the film. I'm going to go ahead and rate this because we need to move on. But I thought the trailer looked fucking awesome, and I thought this movie had a lot of potential, and it ended up being a pretty serious dud. Overall, thought it was pretty boring, had some cool set pieces, but it blew its load way too early. And not an overall good time. I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5.
Well, I'm not quite as negative on it. I think a lot of the claustrophobia, the cramped ship does a lot of the heavy lifting in this movie, where some of the writing fails. The ship and the production design and the set piece itself in the single location really furthers a lot of that tension. With that being said, the writing leaves a whole lot to be desired. While it is shot well and it's not as upsetting as some blatantly bad horror movies that we have seen on the podcast,
Yeah.
it's certainly not particularly good. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I don't think it's bad. And I think, if you had it on in the background, it's not like offensively bad or anything, but don't go out of your way to see it.
2.5. 1 point for the eyeball, 1 point for the butthole, and half a point for the ship. That's all I got. God damn it! You could have had a pretty damn fine movie. The premise alone, just give me the thing on a ship. That's enough. Oh, that's enough for me, and it wasn't. Bummer. Hot bummer.
That will give Sea Fever an average of 2.7 out of 5 pods, and we shall move on.
Indeed. Move on down.
Move on down. To provide some context, before we talked about Sea Fever, we recorded a good probably 45-minute discussion on this next movie, and Ableton crashed inexplicably and the audio file was corrupted, so we are now having to go back and do this again. So sadly, this is probably going to be a somewhat abridged and truncated version of our previous discussion.
Yes, this episode is brought to you by, and then right here, can you just do some like glitch noises?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no.
Well, I think, this dialogue will be more concise now that we know what we're gonna say.
Yeah, we've worked some stuff out. The next film that we're talking about is the recently released Spanish film The Platform, put out on Netflix, directed by Galder Gaztelu Urrutia, and starring Ivan Masague, Zorian Egualeor, Antonio San Juan, Emilio Bale, and Alexandra Masanke. And it is a kind of pseudo sci-fi class allegory about a vertical prison where a platform covered in food moves down from cell to cell, and the ones on top eat a lot, and the ones on bottom don't eat a lot at all. Capitalism.
It's very much the love child of Cube and Snowpiercer.
Cube and Snowpiercer with a healthy dose of Buñuel, I think. Or at least a film student's idea of Buñuel. Because it does have a lot of similar absurdist, classist themes. I don't know the best way to start this, considering that this is a conversation we've already had. I know how both of you feel about this movie.
Let's just break it down from top to bottom.
Yeah, oh, nice. We'll just do a basic plot rundown. I think that'll be pretty concise. Our protagonist, Goreng, wakes up in this prison, and his elderly cellmate, I'm going to use their names this time, Trimagasi, it sort of explains the way this prison works. One cell on each level, 2 cellmates. The platform moves down. Every 30 days, you move to a different level, seemingly at random. The people on the top eat a lot, and the lower down you go, the less food there is, and it gets so bad down in the bottom levels that there's a lot of like cannibalism and violence, and we see that Trimagasi tries to when they get to their second cell, captures Goreng because they're so low that there's not going to be any food, and he wants to be able to slice little pieces off of him so he can eat them. He lets him purge himself for 8 days first, like a snail. He keeps calling him my little snail, mi caracol.
Well, one of the things I think works best with this movie is the structure. It's very centered around Goreng and his 6 months in this gulag prison.
What we learn is that you can volunteer. It's the whole thing is presumably some kind of social experiment to see, like, to test classism. He signs up to be here for 6 months because he wants to quit smoking and he wants to read Don Quixote.
Yeah. More than anything, it feels like a way to cull the population.
Right. Probably has insidious motives, for sure. As capitalism does.
But the way the film is structured is, this giant platform is moving from the top to the bottom, and it stops for a couple minutes on each floor. And every month, they randomly move you to a different floor. The movie's almost split up into 6 sections with each floor he's on.
Kind of
And-
chapters, which structurally is quite nice.
Yeah, and it allows us to get a different perspective on the situation. Very similar to like French like philosophical literature, where like you have like all these different like fictional characters presenting their own take on whatever philosophical topic. In this case, it's it's capitalism.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
I
we see
think
the person who's like trying to beat the system with kindness. We see the person who's trying to who's just become a part of it. We see a little bit of all of them.
And more so than that, it works as a device to build tension in the movie because you never know what floor he's going to end up on next. The outcome of his experience is 100% based on the floor he's on.
For sure.
And there's a dread of being on a lower floor at any given time.
And there's a fair amount of contention throughout the film as to how many levels there are in this prison. One woman who worked there tells him 200, but he ends up on 202 after that, and knows that he can see down the shaft that it goes on for quite a ways, so he thinks 250. But generally, the food runs out before level 100, so that means there's at least 100 levels or more below that just do not get food, and like that's where the real violence happens.
I found that moment with floor 202 really stomach churning because he wakes up and he finds that his bunkmate who had worked for this company who had set him up to be in there, she was saying it's 200 floors deep, and they wake up on 202 and he sees that she's hung herself.
Right.
And it's just stomach churning to know, like, she knows that this is worse than she could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And the only recourse for that is to end everything.
Right. Well, she also does have cancer, as we see. She's got a lot of the cancer. But yeah, like there is definitely like a kind of nihilism. Like she's put herself into this prison because she wants to see like what the company she's works for has been subjecting these people to for all this time. And she realizes like how bad it really is and how little like the employees of the company know what is really going on in here, which ends up being kind of thematic. And I have my fair share of theories that the company, the people at the top, know precisely what's going on here.
Well, they have to, because we know for a fact that all of these people are under surveillance.
Yes.
Because if they are holding on to food, when the platform goes down, the room is either superheated or super chilled.
Until they die.
Until
they return what they've taken to the platform if they throw it in the shaft.
Right, yeah. So they only have the 2 minutes to eat the food. So we know they're under surveillance because... man, what a massive amount of resources it would take for this thing to run. It can't necessarily be like a biological scanner or anything because like they're there, like it's,
well, yeah,
it's
I don't question. This is definitely one of those movies where
it
it's
has
like,
to be surveillance.
You don't question the tech because like what is suspending the platform as it
No,
lowers,
we're not there for that. This is sci-fi.
Yeah,
this isn't like any kind of hard
And
science.
the
We're
thing
not gonna
is,
do
too,
Yeah, no need.
One of the things I kept thinking about is when you're on one of the higher floors and you're pissed off at the people above you, why not just throw a bunch of food into their cell, make their cell heat up or cool down?
Oh, that's actually a really good
smart idea.
Yeah. Take it and throw it into the people above you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, because like what if you took like a handful of rice and threw it up there? Would they have to cast down
While they're sleeping? Oh,
every
man.
grain of rice? Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Well, I do want to make note of the first line of dialogue that we hear in this movie that kind of like sets up the whole theme. There are 3 types of people: those at the top, those at the bottom, and those who fall. And we see all of those 3 types of people throughout this movie. And I think that the idea that they're moving people around onto different floors is kind of saying that like your class, your place in your class can change, and that it may change you because of your elevated or lowered position, because the people at the top can fall to the bottom, and also there are people who physically jump to their death and fall down the
Yeah,
shaft.
yeah.
That
Well, and
happens a lot.
I really
Horrifying.
like how it directly shows how the higher you are up, the less empathy you have for the people below.
Yeah.
Just because you got yours, fuck them. You know, it's that
Right,
type of
exactly.
ideology.
And that ideology seems to extend no matter how far down it goes. Like, even when they're on, you know, a lower level, fucking Trimagasi still like pisses into the level below them, just because, like, even though they're low and there are many people above them, there's always somebody lower that you have an advantage over in some way. I think that makes good sense. One of the ideas of this movie that I do think is quite effective, because I think a lot of it is pretty heavy-handed and very like surface level Marxism. The one thing that I do like is the idea of like forced solidarity, which becomes like a major theme in this movie. You know, Goring is kind of, he starts out as like an idealist, you know, saying like, whoa, well, if we just convince everybody to only take what they need, you know, to ration the food, then it'll get all the way down and everybody can eat. It's like the people up above just need to stop like hoarding it and gluttonously gorging themselves on it. Trimagasi tells him, is like, well, change doesn't happen spontaneously. It has to be forced.
Yeah, and you get multiple examples of that in really interesting ways. Another example of that is the second roommate, the one who used to run it that has cancer. Yeah. She believes that if everyone rations out what they have, it would be easy for everyone to survive. We find out later that that's obviously not the case.
Right.
She makes little plates to send down to the next floor, and they don't respect it at all. You know, it's one of those, I got mine, why care about the people below
right.
me?
I'm up on a higher level this time. I'm going to take advantage of it and eat as much as I can while I have the chance. That's another aspect of like the constantly shifting positions, is that if you've experienced the bottom, when you're sent up to the top, you're more inclined to hoard what you didn't have access to before, because you don't know like when you're going to be sent back down below. So might as well take advantage of it while I have it. And Goring has to force the people below to go along with their plan, because he says, if you don't do what the lady says, I'm going to shit all over the table and contaminate all the food, and then nobody below here is eating, you included. So, and you have to do the same thing. You have to tell the people below you and threaten to shit in their fucking food if they don't. And it's like, that works for a time, because the people want to still be able to eat something, right? And not have shit in their food.
Well, yeah, and on top of that, the bunkmate wants to try to convince the people above them to do the same, right. But it's very clear that you can't shit upwards, you know?
Yeah, Goring says as much.
You can't force solidarity on people that have more power than you know? Which I find kind of interesting. It kind of has a nihilistic streak to it. In that it really shows the narcissism and lack of empathy of those in positions of power and in positions of material wealth.
I think the reason like it really feels so narcissistic too is like in this very specific limited and controlled environment that is the case. But like in reality, like leverage is not, you know, necessarily a ladder. Like it's, you know, it's three-dimensional. Like there are many means of obtaining leverage. So, and you know, it's a little more varied and complex.
There's lateral shifts too. I mean, that's, you know, the movie in a nutshell.
It's more than lateral. Like
it's a shallow metaphor. It can be very effective, but it's not that deep.
Yeah. And I think complicating things kind of diffuses the reality of situations where material wealth is the central factor. You know, there might be other factors of power, but those intersect with wealth primarily. You know?
I mean, for sure, it's literally all about the means that you have. And I think it's worth noting too that for the most part, people who are cellmates who are on the same level cooperate generally, you know, until it becomes a you or me kind of thing, when the means are gone completely in the lower levels. But like, well, while there's still means, like there's solidarity among like the same class level, but not with above or below. And I think that's interesting. I think it's a little simplified because I think that it can extend in, you know, in different directions, more so than it does. But you know, it provides an interesting dynamic, and that you always end up on the same with the same bunkmate unless your bunkmate dies. You know, as long as you're both alive, you end up on the same level together. Should we go ahead and start talking about like the third act and why it works until it very much doesn't?
Yeah, I can lead in a little bit.
Okay.
There are a lot of things I enjoyed about this film. The first two acts, in particular, adored them. I don't necessarily need the allegory, the metaphor to run that deep to have a good time and to be entertained. That's fine. For the most part, it serves that purpose well enough until we get to the ending. And what I'll say is the making of this film, the actual craftsmanship of it, I have little to no complaints about. The practicals, fantastic. The use of like the one location.
In the same vein as Cube,
Yeah, killed
very
it.
much.
Did a great job. There are many things to enjoy. I like the authoritarian, like perfect kitchen up top that we get cuts of, and of course the score is awesome. Now that said, God damn it, the ending really rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, same.
It left quite a bad taste in my mouth. Do you want to do the part, or I can do it?
Yeah, I'll try to breeze through it pretty quickly. So Goring meets Baharat, this guy whose one item that he's brought in with him is a rope. Every prisoner is allowed to bring one item with them, anything they want. Goring brings Don Quixote. His first cellmate, Trimagasi, has a
Samurai Plus.
Samurai Plus, a knife that a self-sharpening knife that he bought off of a telemarketing ad. And his next cellmate, she brings her wiener dog, Ramses II, with her. So of course the dog dies. But anyway, Goring meets Baharat, another kind of idealist who wants to use the rope to climb to the top and escape, and he thinks it's all I gotta do is convince the people above to, you know, hold on to the rope and pull me up, and then I'll be moving through and won't bother them. He literally gets shit in his face, like they literally shit in his face over it, which is very on the nose, but it's entertaining at least. But anyway, Goring decides that, hey, he convinces him the best way for us to get to the top is to first go all the way to the bottom. Let's ride the platform all the way down, and we'll force people to take only a ration that they need so we can feed everybody all the way down. We'll force solidarity. We'll stand here with weapons and keep people from taking more than they need. They meet this old wise man in a wheelchair who tells them, well, okay, that's good, but not enough. First, what you need to do is take the most beautiful, nicest, most delicious plate on the platform and protect it and ensure that it makes it back up to the top, which as a message I think is cool. It's like showing the powers that be, like, look, we have forced solidarity. We could all ensure that this lovely panna cotta made it back up. We don't need this.
And there's also this lovely, like, fuck you message to it as well. It's like you're like sending this like incredible dish back to the kitchen. It's like such a snarky like idea.
Right. It's literally like you think you have the means, but we don't actually need it. You know, like we're stronger together. Your schemes won't work. So I think that idea is great. And it's a great setup for a climax of, you know, them descending all the way down and having to fight off people, you know, trying to take more than what is warranted.
It's very fun. It's very directly Snowpiercer at times too, with all the combat, and
it's very violent.
brutality. Yeah.
It's bloody. Yeah, there's some good visual gags where we get to see like what items other people have brought. Like one dude brought a surfboard, one guy brought an inflatable kiddie pool, so there's just these two fat naked men just like sitting in like this shallow little water, which is pretty apt for the the movie, I think. So like they're going down and they get to the very bottom and they realize that the shaft has gone much deeper than they thought. There are actually 333 levels, and at the bottom they find a child, the child of this crazy woman who has been riding the shaft down looking for her child and murdering people along the way the whole movie. This very ambiguous, quiet figure.
Well, one cool element we should mention as well is when everyone on the floor has died, it just continues down. It doesn't stop at all.
Right.
So you get this great little bit near the end of that where it just keeps going down floor after floor.
Yeah, it's just not stopping at all.
People being dead over all of these floors.
Goring's second cellmate, the woman who worked for the company, told him that that woman's just crazy. She didn't come here with a child. We don't allow anybody under 16 and there are no kids here. So, he thinks that she's just like a crazy woman, and they get down there and find that, there is a child here. There's been a child all along. Baharat dies of his wounds, and they kind of descend eventually into the lower level, the darkness, just this void, a massive dark room. And then Trimagasi, as a hallucination that Goring has been continuing to see him as, you described it, Cleve, as kind of like the devil on his shoulder, like kind of taunting him, tells him that like, the child is the message, not the panna cotta, and that message doesn't need a bearer. So Goring gets off the thing and just stays down there in the darkness as like the kid rockets back up to the top, and
or like slowly ascends into the light, I think. And
then rockets up because the thing shoots back up the shaft. And then it rolls credits, and it's such a frustratingly soft non-answer to like the problems that this movie is like.
Well, and I think one thing with it too is, since we talked about this earlier, the first time we went around, I think I can lay this out a little more concisely. I think where a lot of the crux of this movie is surrounding forced solidarity, the act of sending the kid up by themselves is a very passive symbol.
Yeah.
You have to rely on the kitchen and the people in the kitchen to do something about it. The movie has stated before, you can't shit upwards,
Right.
Even if you send the kid up, that's not guaranteeing anything.
Right. The movie presents it in such a way that it's saying like, oh, well, if the platform comes back up and there's a kid there, the people working here will say, hey, that's against the rules. There aren't supposed to be kids in here. What's really going on? That it'll force like an introspective moment that will like bring the whole thing down, which is, I think, really naive and not a good solution.
And also not indicative of the message they've been portraying the entire film, which is
that the people higher up don't fucking care.
Right, and like assumedly, like there were people higher up, like running this non-literally higher up, like running this organization,
who knew the child was there and put the child there.
Right, someone in power put the kid there. Like, so we know that like they're probably confident in that, and like that anyone who presents that problem is probably just going to get fired or written off. And generally too, like that's pretty easy to cover as well. Like, how'd that kid get in here is like a cliche saying for a reason. It breaks all the rules that they've already been writing up. And of course, there are the questions too, like, how did the kid get in there? Why is the kid in there?
Right.
We don't know, I guess, other than just like to give us like some sort of like half-ass satisfying ending. So looking at this big picture, my problem with it is that it all boils down to their final statement just being, think of the children.
Yep.
And that is a logical fallacy and a moral platitude. Like, it means nothing when it comes to actually like solving any of the problems that they've presented us.
Especially so
I'm left very hollow and feeling nihilistic from
especially
a big picture.
when they've literally told us that change does not happen spontaneously, that it has to be forced. And I think that like sending the kid back up, and like the film presents it as a very positive, hopeful thing. Like
there's bright light. It's
the
very
music,
angelic,
the
like this
hopeful
child
music
rising up out of the darkness into the
swells.
heavens.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's not forcing change. That's literally sending a think of the children message, which is ineffective when you're dealing with people that don't have empathy, which is what would be required to set up and profit from this system. Capitalism, you know.
So it's a very passive symbol of solidarity.
Exactly.
You know? And I see the ending is quite bleak, and them being sent up is so ambiguous at best.
It's like giving up.
Yeah,
Right.
and it does not fit with the tone of what they convey that sequence with.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
they make it seem like it's triumphant when really it's not.
No,
Yeah.
that's not a victory. After the movie was over, Ben suggested a fantastic alternate ending that I much would have preferred.
Before we do, I have a couple more points on it,
Okay.
because like that largely covers the big picture, the issues with it thematically, but also like small scale. He's gonna leave that child unattended on that platform,
Sending it into who knows what.
whose
at the top.
hands?
Yeah.
Like look after the kid. Why does he listen to the devil on his shoulder? What good does this do? Like he's just gonna sit there alone, dead in the dark. So our protagonist, who we've been following this whole time, just chooses death.
Yeah,
At the end, for no reason. His sacrifice doesn't do any good. He is much more useful staying alive and going back up with the kid. Like, if you
Especially
can go up holding the
considering-
panna cotta, you can go up holding the kid.
Right.
You know, and keeping them safe.
Especially considering that, like, Trimagasi as, like, a human character before he was a hallucination, before his death, is constantly telling Goreng that he is naive for trying to fight, for suggesting that he can make change, you know, that he can convince people to have solidarity. Like, he mocks Goreng for it. You know, his whole thing is saying obviously to every question Goreng asks, like he's speaking to an idiot.
Obvio.
You know, obvio. And to then have a spiritual or hallucination or whatever version of that character tell him, in effect, to give up. Like, that's not the way they portray it, but effectively that is what he is telling him, to give up. And then Goreng does it and feels good about it, and that's like, it's supposed to be a good thing. Like, it's a completely mixed message that makes me wonder if the filmmakers really knew what they were trying to say all along.
Right, because here's the thing. Also, mechanically, like within the world setting, it doesn't work because we don't understand why this child is there. Like, and how the child could have survived.
Right.
Because this child has been here for like 5 or 6 months.
Or longer.
Or longer. Why didn't the mom ever find her? Because the mom has been coming down every time. So, and the child would have starved before then. So the only answer is the child has been like placed in this room at this point for some reason, which again plays into the puppetry of it all, meaning that our main character is just still a puppet and nothing comes through. So like there's no, from really like big picture to small to even mechanically, large scale world motivation, our protagonist's motivation, or even just the world building itself, the mechanics don't add up for this ending. It just works from no perspective for me.
I think from a filmmaking perspective, they were trying to do the Cube ending, the ambiguous simpleton going into the white light.
The innocent.
Yeah.
The innocent.
But the thing is, where in Cube, it's much more ambiguous because he walks out and there's no loaded ideology as much in him walking out. It leaves the viewer much more ambiguous to what that implies.
Also in Cube, our other likable protagonists make worthy sacrifices. Like they're actually like going up against like very physical odds in that, like because we do have another protagonist who's like relatively worthy of getting out, if I remember correctly, like who isn't a terrible person.
Oh yeah, the what's her face, the one, the smart math girl.
Yeah, like she's fine. Like there's she could have gotten out, but she makes a very legitimate sacrifice there. Like she actually I forget exactly what happens, but she's dealing with something to do with the cube.
Well,
like,
there's
which is why I
There's
think
the
they
cop
were trying
guy.
to imitate that in this movie,
and I agree fully.
to lesser effect.
And I think you're right.
And I think the reason it falls flat is because of the hallucination directly pushing the scales down. And
Well, and also our protagonist's sacrifice means nothing.
And also, I think that
And we also haven't gotten to know this kid either. Like
also, I think that there's, and I didn't even think about this before, but I think that there's something that's kind of insulting about applying the only the innocent is worthy of salvation message
Right.
to like a classist thing, as in like you have sinned because you have been placed in a place where you have to sin to survive, by powers outside of your control.
It's not very Christian, I'll tell you that.
But therefore you're not worthy of salvation because you've had to be down in the muck. Like I don't like that.
No.
I don't like that's not hopeful to me. Like yeah, it's a really fucking shitty ending. And can we talk briefly about Ben's alternate ending?
Oh
before
no,
we wrap
we
up?
got to.
Yeah,
Sure. So I think, this movie emphasizes the idea of forced solidarity. When they're starting to go down on the platform, I thought, it would be a way better ending for them instead of trying to ration out the food as far as they can to try to get as many people onto the platform as they can to take them all up to the top. You gotta force the solidarity. You can't shit upwards, but you can bring a fuckload of people upwards and force some solidarity.
But you can't shit upwards, but you can clog the toilet until it explodes.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think that would have been such a more satisfying and like genuinely uplifting and like powerful ending. We would not have even had to see what happened when they got to the top. That's not even what's important. It's the idea that they are all rising to the top together to take on whatever is up there. And you could cut to credits there. You could cut to credits when they get to the top and seeing the shocked faces of the people in the kitchen, like preparing the next day's meal. That would be a so much more satisfying ending.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like it's satisfying to see these two characters beat the shit out of people and all of the violence
satisfying.
And that.
Like it's great.
But like the visual element of seeing all these people, piled onto this platform and huddled up together going up is just as striking of a visual.
And
in my
I think
opinion.
you could still have some of the action too, because like of course there would be those who don't want to get on the platform. Like there would be those who still say, no, I'm going to get my food while I can. I'm going to grab my share while I can. So you still have the room. You still have the room for the action. You still have the room for the katana guy, which is one of the best parts of the movie. None of that is diminished, but instead your climax builds to like a much more like satisfying, defiant ending. And I think that for a movie like this, that is like obviously trying to say something about class awareness. Obvio. Class awareness is really fucking important. I think it's good to have messages like this in movies. Fucking commit to it, Don't muddle it with a not only narratively unsatisfying ending, but also an ideologically soft ending. Like, what does that really say about like the film's message overall? Is that like you can just say like, oh yeah, it sucks to be shit on by the people over my head, but maybe they would be better if they considered the children. I think that shit is soft.
Yeah. And it's such a bummer because we're set up so beautifully with the platform like cutting back to the platform rocketing back up after it's been to the bottom.
Right.
Like we see a person at one point too, like just like cut in half because they were like clearly like, they were like looking over the side at the wrong time or something. And the idea of like all these people huddled together as it's like rocketing back up to the top, and ding, it gets to the top, and you see like a scared guard or whatever as all these guys with their weapons and shit, you know, like are running off the platform. Would have been awesome. Or just them riding up to it, you know.
Yeah,
but instead, like, I'm left, like, while we were watching the movie, I literally said, no, please don't cut to credits a second before it did. Like, I was like, oh, don't cut to credits here, please.
You did that with
don't
Sea
do it.
Fever too.
I did it with both movies.
Yeah.
Like, no, don't cut to credits. And then,
Like, don't cut to credits, and then both times.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the thing with
Damn.
this one is, like, I'm fine with it having an ambiguous ending, but, like, the ending it has now is muddled in what it's trying to say. I think with the ending I proposed, for example, it would have been much more clear in what they're trying to convey.
Yes.
You know, even if we don't know the outcome of what happens with that.
It would have carried the message through to the end.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a coherence to that with everything they've been saying up to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just like, if you're going to present me with all these problems, give me a solution or something. Like, even because this is a fantastical environment. Like, it's a weird setting. Like, and you have to write off a lot of things going into it. So we're already there. Like, engage in the fantasy. Give me like some sort of like functional solution, and it doesn't. It's a shame. It's a shame. Or at least one that fits within your world building. You know, like that makes sense. But
Totally.
the kid in no respect makes any sense.
Big disappoint. Do you want to go ahead and rate, Cleve?
Yes.
Why don't you just
Okay.
sum things up
So
nicely?
I know that half of our discussion was about how much we didn't like the ending, but there's a lot of great movie here. To just reiterate everything I've already said, you know, the craftsmanship is fantastic, and I was thoroughly entertained up until that point. So it was still a delicious feast that left a bad taste in my mouth at the end. But so I'll still give it a lot of props for it, and I would recommend, like, if you like being entertained and you know you can get past like a kind of a flop of an ending, like, you'll have a good time watching this movie. I think like you'll enjoy yourself. So I'm gonna give it a 3.5. It was close to a 4 or a 5. I would have been just, you know, like, a few things changed. I think I would have really enjoyed this film front to back.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for me to really dock too many points for essentially the last couple minutes of a movie.
Yeah, I definitely don't hold like a huge amount of resentment, lest I think that it sounds like we do.
A good chunk of the movie was conceptually interesting. It's shot really well. I think all of the acting is pretty solid. The writing is pretty sharp for the most part, minus, you know, a few sloppiness with plot holes and stuff like that, and, you know, stretches in logic or, you know, rules. But overall, I think it's a solid movie, and I think it's worth checking out. You know, I think it's simple in what it's trying to say. It's not particularly deep, but I don't think that means the ideas conveyed aren't necessary, especially in these times. So I think it's worth checking out. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 as well.
Well, considering that we just had the same conversation twice in the span of a couple of hours, I did gloss over some of my other nitpicks, of which I did have some. I think there's some pretty frustrating instances of the film breaking the rules of its world for plot reasons. I think that some of the metaphor is a little bit too on the nose, and I would have liked to see a bit deeper exploration into some things. But overall, like, the aesthetic is good, the acting is very solid, and you know, it's a relatively entertaining movie. The ending did more than leave a bad taste in my mouth. Like, that was fucking bad. It's not a bad movie. I'm going to give it I liked plenty of things about it. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, and that will give The Platform an average rating of 3.3 out of 5 pods. Well, next week we're going to be doing part 2. Cleveland, do you want to go ahead and reveal what movies we're going to be talking about, or would you rather save that as a surprise? We didn't explain what these were going to be beforehand.
We're going to be talking about Shrek 2 and
Garfield
that
2,
everyone
Tale
loves.
of Two Kitties.
Garfield 2, A Tale of Two
Some
Kitties.
say that is the scariest horror movie of all time.
Both of these movies from 2020.
Yeah. So get hype for Shrek, and that's gonna be next week.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly because I'm genuinely scared of Ableton crashing again, and I won't be able to deal with that twice in one night. So if you like the show, leave us a nice rating on Apple Podcasts and a nice review. Hit those 5 stars. Let us know what you think of the show. Follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod, and check out our Letterboxd as well at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod. You'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Deep State Ozzy.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio at Light Arc Studio as we continue to put out the next big patch of our game. It Stares back in early access on Steam. You know the drill. You can also check out my work on ArtStation if you search Cleveland Mosier. I'm doing all kinds of spookies and not spookies and D&D characters for commissions and stuff like that. So if you want some cool art painted up for you, shoot me a message. Maybe we can work something fun out.
All right. Well, come back next week for part 2 of our mid-year catch-up as we see what other dregs 2020 has to offer. Goodbye.